In this episode, we talk about the impact of Assam's delimitation exercise on the current Lok Sabha polls. We also talk about why BJP's Hyderabad candidate Madhavi Latha has been booked by the police. But first, we talk about Karnataka's free bus ride scheme for women. Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargava, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. During these Lok Sabha polls, almost every political party has been aggressively targeting women voters, promising them a range of schemes. In Karnataka, one such scheme that was launched almost a year ago by the ruling Congress government was the Shakti bus scheme that made bus rides free for all the women in the state.
So this was one of the 5 guarantees the Congress government had in its manifesto ahead of 2023 state elections.
That's Indian Express's Uma Vishnu, who recently wrote about the scheme for the paper after taking 4 buses across 500 kilometers in the state.
This was one that was primarily targeted at women, and there was another one called Griha Lakshmi. These are 2 schemes that was focused on women. It offered free bus tickets to women and girls across the state in any of the 20,000 odd state government-run buses.
This scheme was similar to the ones that are currently in place in 4 other states: Tamil Nadu, Telangana, Punjab, and Delhi.
But unlike Delhi, where anyone on a bus, any woman on a bus gets a ticket, here you have to show your original of your Aadhaar, which makes it a little tedious. But the fact that everyone is making use of it. So there aren't too many people who say, I don't have an Aadhaar and I can't, or it's too much of an effort to do that. So almost every woman on a bus makes use of this scheme.
She says what makes Karnataka's scheme a standout is the scale. With a budget allocation of 5,000 crore rupees this year, the scheme caters to women and girls who can travel anywhere in the state in the 20,000 state-owned non-premium buses.
So the stated aim, of course, was to get more women in the workforce and to have them to reclaim some of these public spaces, essentially.
Now, recently, the scheme had made news after JDS leader Kumaraswamy said that the Congress government's guarantee schemes had led women in the state astray, a comment he later apologized for.
So what he said was, because of the Congress government schemes, women in Karnataka are going astray. So he said that in Kannada, of course. He said, Dari tapkondu hogta idare, which literally translates into they're losing their way, they're going astray.
Now this comment about women also stands out because his party, which has allied with the BJP in the state, currently finds itself in the midst of a major controversy involving its leader and MP Prajwal Revana, who has been accused of sexually abusing multiple women. But talking about the scheme, Uma says that the Congress at the moment is banking on it big time.
So they know these are very popular schemes. So the Transport Minister Ramalanka Reddy told me how the internal surveys show that 87% of the beneficiaries of this particular scheme, it's called the Shakti scheme, the free bus ticket scheme is called Shakti. So he said their internal surveys show that 87% of the beneficiaries will vote for the party, which is an overwhelming big number. And their confidence comes from the fact that they think that these are 2 schemes that touches people's lives.
And Uma, is the BJP worried about it at all?
The BJP calls it Jumla, interestingly, which is something that the non-BJP parties have used very often against the BJP. So the Karnataka BJP spokesperson I spoke to, MG Mahesh, he called it Jumlas and he says, I don't see the impact of the scheme on the elections. So he says, of course, women are traveling. In fact, the early days, because it's a free bus ticket scheme, so they very enthusiastically hopped onto buses. But he says now women see it as, just another election gimmick.
And Uma, considering that all women across the state can travel in these buses, do we know how many more women are traveling in buses now?
So the scheme, it was introduced on June 11 last year. And since then, there have been some close to 200 crore bus tickets being issued to women and girls. The Transport Department's numbers says that since the launch of the scheme, there are 4 bus government-run corporations. So these have seen a 30% jump in passenger count. So there are about above 1 crore people traveling every day, which close to 60% are women. So they didn't have a breakup of women earlier. Before the scheme was launched, they didn't know how many of the tickets went to women. So now they do, which is about 60%.
Yeah, and to understand the impact of this scheme, you actually traveled across the state in these buses.
Yeah, I did 528 kilometers across the state. I started from Hubli in the north, went up further north to Belgavi, came down to Hubli, and then from there on, I worked my way down to Bangalore, which is like a cross-country bus journey.
Right, and talk about what was the biggest thing that stood out to you while taking these bus rides.
What really stood out was just the number of women in public spaces, just the sheer number of women in buses. There are women going to work. A lot of them were going to their parents' homes, visiting their parents. There were people who were attending weddings. There were a lot of grandmothers traveling with their children because it was holiday season. And there was this woman I met on one of the buses to Bangalore from Davangere. So she was talking to me about how she would earlier take the train, and now that the bus tickets are free, so she says she and her daughters-in-law, they take the bus now. So she was happy about the scheme. She said Siddaramaiah has done a lot of good work, and I hope the schemes don't stop if the Congress loses, she said. Yeah.
Also, interestingly, there were a lot of women who complained about this scheme, which you write is a sign of an interesting change.
Yeah. In fact, the first thing that most women, interestingly, said was, their first reaction was, oh, the buses have become crowded, which is also a sign of people wanting more now. Now that they've got the free bus scheme, it's aspirational. Now they want seats on buses. Now they want a better, more comfortable journey. So it's only when you talk to them a little further that most of them spoke about how the scheme has changed their lives, really. So a huge number of women were traveling to pilgrimage centers. Now, this is something that has social sanction. You say you're going to a temple, it's fine at home for,
Nobody questions
Nobody questions you, when you do that. So the temple routes, the pilgrimage routes are almost all full. And ever since the scheme started, there are conductors, there are transport department people telling you that those routes are always running full. So I went with this temple town of Savdati. This is up north in Belgavi. And I accompanied these 4 women on a bus ride. So they were telling me how earlier, before the scheme started, now the Savdati is a pilgrimage center. It's associated with the Devdasi tradition that's now banned, of course. But a lot of women pilgrims go to this place. They've always gone. But so these 4 women, in fact, I spoke to, said they earlier went with their husbands. They sat pillion on their bikes and they went. They would tell us they would stop where they wanted to. It was always on their terms. They stopped where they wanted to, and which is almost always to drink, they said. And then, we kept waiting for them. And then we had to go shopping. They would say, keep moving. They had no patience for us.
So in this entire plan, everything would be on their terms.
Their terms. So I asked him, is it better now? So she said, yeah, it's much more fun. We traveled together and they're all friends. Interestingly, 3 of them were Muslims. One was a Hindu woman. And they're great friends, thick. So she said, now we all travel together. There's something called mandaki that they buy, which is murmura. And we shop for mandaki and take home bananas for our children. In fact, when I went with them, they stopped at this tiffin house there and they had some juice. And so they said it's a lot more fun when we are traveling together. One of them even said, in fact, if you ask me, you shouldn't even get married.
And Uma, since there were a lot of complaints about buses being crowded, does the Congress government acknowledge that there is a shortage of buses in the state?
Yeah, so buses are crowded, and that's something the Karnataka government, the transport minister admitted to as well. He said, yes, the buses are crowded, and we're working towards making the rides better. Because he blamed the previous BJP government for the shortage of buses, and he said the matter was being resolved. He said the earlier government didn't buy enough buses, and that the Congress government, he says we've purchased about 5,000 buses, of which 2,000 have been handed over to them, and that the rest will come in June. So the Congress is hoping things will get better because there are a lot of complaints about buses being crowded and there not being enough buses.
Though, Uma, even when people were complaining about the buses being crowded, were the reactions of women different from that of men?
So like I said, a lot of them complained about the buses being crowded. The women, of course, spoke about, we wish we had more seats and we wish, because we have to go home and cook as well and, the inconvenience of it. But what really stood out was almost every man I spoke to didn't approve of the scheme. There was one man I saw at the Hubli bus stand when he said he was walking around with his backpack and he wasn't getting a place. He was trying to go into Bijapur in the north and he said he wasn't getting, the buses were all packed. And so he kept waiting for a relatively freer bus. And he said, where are these women traveling? They're traveling like they're possessed. This is just not good. It's just so disruptive because he says that women do no work at home. All they're doing is traveling. And interestingly, he also said, it's a very bad scheme. He said, I wish the government had reserved 50% of the seats at least for us. They should have been more equal. Yeah, so.
Okay, and with so many women taking these buses, did anyone articulate this thing of public spaces being reclaimed by women?
Yeah, so there was someone called Devi I met. So she was talking about, she said, oh, it's a good scheme. She said, women now don't have to ask their husbands for money when they're traveling. They can go to their parents' homes without asking for money. And so I asked her about men complaining. She said, oh, they're just jealous. She said, Hotte Uri. And I also spoke to Rosa Abraham of the Center for Sustainable Employment at Azim Premji University in Bangalore. So she said, while there is a direct link between the presence of women in public spaces and its impact on employment generation, she said it's more important to look at what schemes such as Shakti do is to help women claim public spaces that are still very gendered. So she said a lot of leisure for women right now is still in very private settings. It's watching a television, whereas this allows them to reclaim that public space, which is a very important thing.
And did you see that? Did you see women just spending their time in leisure?
Yeah, there were. Of course, a lot of women did tell me, oh, we don't, because every time I brought up what Kumaraswamy said, a lot of them said, oh, no, we travel only when we absolutely must and that we don't while away our time. So they felt the need to say that, unfortunately. But there were also women who were having a good time in public. In fact, the 3 women I went with to the temple town of Saudati, they stopped to buy bananas. They were haggling over the price of mandaki. They stopped to look at bangles and they didn't buy any, but they did stop at almost every little shop they could. They finally had stopped at a tiffin house and said there were no rush to go home, and they traveled quite a bit to get here, but they weren't rushing back home.
And next we talk about how Assam's delimitation exercise, which took place last year, is impacting the polls this time. But before we go ahead, let's first understand what delimitation is.
Delimitation is a routine process. It's the redrawing of constituencies, usually done to accommodate, changes in population so that the map of constituencies reflects the current population of any given area.
That's Indian Express's Sukrita Baruah, who reports on Assam for the paper.
So it's conducted everywhere. It's been conducted multiple times. But in Assam, the last delimitation exercise that was conducted was in 1976. A lot of states had delimitation exercises conducted in the 2000s, but it didn't happen in Assam because there was a lot of opposition to it. As you know, there's a long pending question of citizenship in Assam. There was a demand that until the NRC is finalized, the National Register of Citizens is finalized, and in quotes, illegal immigrants who entered the state post 1971 aren't identified and removed from the electoral rolls, this kind of a delimitation exercise should not take place because it would not be an accurate representation of the population. So that is why, in the face of, resistance, the delimitation had not been conducted in the 2000s.
But she says that later, in December 2022, the Election Commission said that it will carry out the exercise in Assam in 2023, but that it would be based on the 2001 census.
Okay, so you see the time gap. And because the delimitation exercise was being carried out even before the NRC has been finalized, right? So the final draft NRC was issued in 2019, but it hasn't yet been notified and finalized. So given that the NRC process has not been completed and that it was conducted on the basis of the 2001 census, it was controversial right from the beginning. So this is the background to the delimitation exercise. Finally, it was carried out last year itself, and the final notification was issued in August last year.
Now, this exercise has raised a lot of concerns, and its effects can be seen most prominently in the constituencies of Dhubri and Barpeta. To understand what delimitation has meant for the residents of these constituencies and how it is affecting the ongoing polls, my colleague Niharika Nanda speaks to Sukrita in this segment.
Sukrita, can you talk about what were some of the concerns that were raised regarding the delimitation exercise in Assam?
So amongst the primary issues that were flagged by, civil society groups, by MLAs, different groups, was that, for one, a possible reduction in the number of Muslim representatives. And this is because of the redrawing of the constituency. So the allegation that was being posed by, civil society organizations that represent Muslim interests or the Muslim MLAs and MPs was that the way that the constituencies have been redrawn, particularly of the different assembly constituencies, the number of seats in which Muslim voters play a decisive role has been reduced. So that's because of the way, say, the population has been divided between different constituencies. And they allege that, so far in the 126-seater Assam State Assembly, around 30 Muslim MLAs on an average get elected. So they were saying that this will come down by like 10 to 11 seats. So that is one major issue that was being raised by groups. Another major, issue pertained to the Barak Valley, which is the Bengali majority part of southern Assam, where the number of assembly seats have been reduced to 15 to 13.
And so then what kind of an impact would you say this delimitation exercise has on the current Lok Sabha polls?
In this Lok Sabha election, last year's delimitation exercise do play a very major role. It is shaping how the contests are playing out in several different constituencies. One of the most notable, of course, is the Kolyabor constituency, which used to be represented by a prominent Congress leader, Gaurav Gogoi. And he's represented that particular Lok Sabha seat twice in a row. And it's something that's been represented by members of his family for like decades now. But because of the delimitation exercise, that constituency has been completely changed and it has been renamed to Kaziranga constituency. So because that constituency has ceased to exist and the current nature of Kaziranga, it's believed that Gaurav would not be able to successfully contest there. So his constituency has changed altogether. So he's contesting from Jorhat instead. So we're seeing how, the redrawing of constituencies is affecting the way that the Lok Sabha elections are playing out.
And you write that this exercise has particularly affected the areas of Dhubri and Barpeta. Tell us, in what way can we see that?
So Dhubri and Barpeta are two constituencies which are located in western Assam. The Dhubri constituency shares a long border with Bangladesh. And before delimitation, both of these constituencies had the majority of the voters were Muslims, in particular Muslims of Bengali origin. They were in majority in both the seats. They were in a larger majority in Dhubri. And in 2019, both these constituencies elected Muslim MPs. There was Abdul Khalik of the Congress from Barpeta. And there was Badruddin Ajmal from the AIUDF representing Dhubri. In the delimitation exercise that was carried out last year, there was a, drastic restructuring of the Barpeta constituencies. So what has been alleged by lawmakers from this area is that this constituency has been reshaped in such a way that large Muslim majority belts along, the Senga area, along Jonia, along Bagbor, have been carved out of the Barpeta Lok Sabha constituency and have been shifted to the Dhubri Lok Sabha constituency. So as a result of which, the percentage of minority voters in Barpeta have come down considerably and that it is no longer a seat where they are in majority. And that large numbers of these voters have now been transferred to Dhubri where they were anyway in a large percentage. In effect, the possibility of a Muslim MP being elected from this region has been reduced to just Dhubri. So that is the allegation that was raised. And it's reflected in the choice of candidates as well. So Abdul Khalik was dropped as the Congress's candidate and the Congress fielded Deep Bayon instead. And the primary contender now, who seems to be a front runner from Barpeta is the BJP's ally AGP's candidate, Phani Bhushan Chaudhary, which would be a major break from, the MPs who've been elected in the past from this seat.
And Sukrita, what do these changes look like on the ground? Talk about what you found out while you visited these regions.
So, I had gone to Senga, which is a part of Barpeta district and was earlier a part of the Barpeta Lok Sabha constituency, but where, a lot of areas have been transferred to the Dhubri constituency. So there, I found that it was very, visually stark, that a lot of how much this constituency had been carved. Because as you kind of drive through that area, you could see the political posters would keep changing. So for a few villages, you would see posters for the Dhubri candidates. And a few villages later, you would see posters for the Barpeta candidates. And then again for Dhubri candidates. And it would keep alternating, the landscape would just keep changing. So speaking to people on the ground, to different voters, it seemed to be very clear to them that it was the Muslim villages which had been moved to the Dhubri constituency And that, the villages which remained in Barpeta were villages with mostly Bengali Hindu or Assamese Hindu populations.
So when you spoke to the people, how did they express their sentiments about this?
So there's some amount of discontent over the idea that the voters say that we've been divided on the basis of religion. One particular person I had met, his house is in this particular Gaon Panchayat called Haripur, and that's a Muslim majority Gaon Panchayat. So he was saying that, a little bit to my left, there are houses which are part of Barpeta, a little bit to my right are houses which are in Barpeta, and to my front. So I'm in effect, surrounded in all directions by Barpeta constituency. So I feel so isolated. And to believe that this is because of religious reasons is, upsetting. So amongst, people who were in those villages which have been moved to Dhubri, there was this sense of isolation, maybe of, saying that, it's kind of, we've been sidelined over here and we've been, all of us have been dumped into Dhubri, which is in quotes the Muslim seat now. So that kind of a sentiment was there on the ground. So yeah, that's what I found when I was there.
And Sukrita, can you tell us about the kind of comments that have been made by local leaders in the state and what have we heard from the Chief Minister?
So, during the course of the campaign, most BJP leaders, AGP leaders have been claiming that, the BJP-led alliance is going to win, I quote, at least 12 seats in Assam. There are 14 seats in Assam. And then last month, our Chief Minister Himanta Biswa Sarma, he went one step further. And he said that, the BJP-led alliance is going to win 13 seats. And when questioned what that seat that they won't win is, he named Dhubri. And he said that, given the demographic of the place, given the principles that we have been voicing, it is not possible for us to win Dhubri. And he said that, I won't even campaign in Dhubri, which is not true. He did go to Dhubri one day to campaign. But, this sense that the BJP will not even attempt to win that constituency was kind of clear in what he was saying. In the past, he's also told reporters that the BJP doesn't need Mia votes until they in court reform their ways. Mia is a pejorative term that is used for Bengali speaking Muslims. So, all that can add to a sense of marginalization amongst the Muslim voters in this region.
And in the end, we talk about BJP's Hyderabad candidate, Madhavi Latha. During the fourth phase of the Lok Sabha elections that took place yesterday, a video surfaced that showed Latha asking niqab-wearing women voters to remove their face coverings so she could verify their identities. Later in the day, Hyderabad police registered an FIR against Latha under IPC sections pertaining to undue influence at an election, obstructing a public servant, intent to incite, and misconduct at the polling station. When confronted by the media after the video surfaced, here's what she had to say.
As per law, candidate has a right to check the identity card with the face, without the face mask. I'm not a male, I'm a female, and with lot of humbleness, I've only requested them, can I please see and verify with the ID card? And if somebody wants to make a big issue out of it, that means that he's scared of it.
Now, Latha also spoke to the media after the FIR was lodged against her, and she continued to defend herself.
90% of the booths have got compromised. This is what is happening. Police do not want to instruct female constables to check the face and with the voter ID. I am not worried because...
Now, if needed, polling officers are required to verify a voter's appearance against the photo on the voter card. Indian Express's Damini Nath writes that to ensure this is done while also protecting the privacy of the woman elector in ghungat, burqa or niqab, the Election Commission of India has issued standing instructions for returning officers of constituencies and presiding officers of polling stations. The Election Commission of India's handbook for presiding officers says that if sufficiently large number of Parda-Nashin women electors are assigned to your polling station, you should make special arrangements for their identification and application of indelible ink on the left index finger by a lady polling officer in a separate enclosure having due regard to privacy, dignity, and decency. It's also key to note that candidates or their polling agents are allowed access to polling stations in the constituency to ensure that the polling process is conducted without interference. However, they are not permitted to interfere in the voting process. The responsibility and right to verify the identity of voters lies with the Election Commission of India and not a contesting candidate. And so it was bearing this in mind that Madhavi Latha's action was viewed as interference, and therefore, at Election Commission of India's behest, she was booked by the police. Now, this is not the first time that Latha finds herself in the middle of a controversy. On the 7th of April, a video allegedly showed her symbolically shooting an arrow in the direction of a mosque during a Ram Navami rally. She later apologized and claimed that the video clip was incomplete. You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar and was produced by Niharika, Nanda and me, Shashank Bhargava. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.